Um, Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. I will continue with chapter 5, is about sensory and perceptual processes in the workplace. So before we go further into the topics, we need to understand some of the five basic senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. So these actually in order to understand sensation and perception, you have to know about the existence of five senses. So perception is being aware or conscious of ourselves, others, environment, and world, and this could give meaning to the awareness. So sensation consists of sensation is actually or senses. We need senses in order to understand what outside and what inside our body, so that we can aware what is happening outside or inside. So it is important to understand what outside we interact, what outside, for example, stimuli outside to connect within ourselves through senses. So even though we could interact, so we could detect whatever happened outside through our senses. For example, we see the things from through our eyes, we hear the voice or the sounds or through our ears, and we can smell the grass or the flowers through our nose senses within our nose. But that's referring to the senses. But how we interpret, how we perceive things or stimuli outside, so that's the acts of perception. So perception is cognitive process that happen in human body and mind. So while we senses the things stimuli outside, our mind interprets, our mind organize, our mind select, understand, try to understand through our senses what happened outside, what happened inside. So senses actually connects us with the external environment, and this information be interpreted by the brain through we call it perception. So perception is the cognitive process happen in human body and mind where we select. So when after we receive or while we sense the information from outside, our brain select, analyze, organize, interpret, and understand whatever happened outside or whatever happened inside through sensory stimuli, the impression that we receive from sensory from the environment. So see here, perception happen in the brain, in our heads. Stimuli happen outside, were connected to us through the sensory. So our senses receive the information from outside, and then our brain interprets or selects, analyze, organize, interpret, try to understand what happened. So we is not stand alone, but we could understand things outside, environment happen, things happen outside through our senses, which been interpreted by the brain, where the brain selects, analyze, interpret, understand the information. This process is called perception. So sensory, basically the sensory abilities and awareness of healthy individual, basically more or less the same. However, there are some differences in perceptual process and experience. This explain why people understood differently even though they see the same thing. For example, when we see the same thing, many of others also see the same thing, but we understood differently because of our perception. Our perception tend to interpret, our brain tend to interpret differently from others. But our sensory or our senses basically see the same thing. So sometimes that's also because of the error in terms of our perceptions, maybe due to biological and also psychological problems or states in our body that make us interpret things differently. However, they are unique, selective to each individual. So individual have maybe have differences in terms of understanding the stimuli. Can be due to biology, can be due to psychology, can be due to error also, error or perceptual error, which could lead differences in opinion, differences in understanding, misinterpretation of the stimuli, and so on. So we move to sensations. Sensation is basically the activations of the sense organ by a source of physical energy or stimuli inside the body and the environment. So we start to aware things, whatever happened outside through our senses. Our senses are at every organs of the senses there will be receptor responsible to detect the existence of these whatever happened outside. So we could understand whatever happened outside in the environments through our senses. In every organs of senses we have sense receptor. This actually could that make us more able to understand the existence of the stimuli outside. So for example, we have five senses here, and then we have also each of the senses have their own receptors, and these receptor and senses actually they are part in the brain that responsible for each of the senses. For example, vision, the receptor is called photoreceptors, and in the brain that there is a visual cortex that is responsible to process the information that we see from the visions. And also from, for example, taste and smell, there's a receptor called chemoreceptor, and in the brain there's a part that responsible to process the information from the senses or receptor, whether to tell what we eat is sweet or sour and so on. So as you can see, there are differences in the receptor. Hearing, touch, and balance are being done by this receptor. Mechano, taste, and smell is actually the receptor for taste and smell is called chemoreceptor. So the differences between these two receptors, mechano and chemoreceptor. Mechano is responsible for the senses related to skin, muscle, and inner ears, and chemo related to senses of nose and mouth. So mechano is sensitive to touch, pressure, sound and emotions, movement. While chemo responsible for the smell and for the taste, and there's a olfactory bulb in our mouth on our tongue, and taste olfactory on our nose. Taste bud, we have taste bud at different places in our tongue. We have salty, bitter, sour, and sweet, as you can see later. I think uh, in this photo we have different taste buds where we can detect difference in taste. Okay, in our eyes is our sense. So there's a part of brain that responsible for detecting outside through our eyes, that we can see things because of this part of the brain, primary visual, that responsible to process the information that we receive from our eyes. And for ears, there's a part of the brain that responsible to process the informations that we receive from our ears, called auditory cortex. But here this is visual cortex for the eyes, this is auditory cortex. And mechanoreceptor for our skin. This is the outer part of the skin. That's under the outer part. There's a mechanoreceptor sensitive to the touch. And in the brains, that part that responsible to process the informations about the touch is temporal lobes, and taste are responsible to process the informations about the taste is called gustatory cortex, located in the middle of the brains. And for smell, around our nose, the brain that responsible to process the smell, to differentiate the smell, this part called olfactory cortex in the middle of the brain also. And then there's another area under sensation and perception. They call it the study of psychophysics, where they study the relationship between actual physical stimuli that exist outside and the observed stimuli and response. So the actual stimuli is no difference. Everyone see the same. The observed stimuli, that's what people perceive, observe and respond, that can lead to misunderstanding. So the actual physical stimuli is the same, everyone see perhaps the same, but we have different understanding because of the observe. We perceive, we observe the stimuli differently. So psychophysics study the relationship between actual stimuli, physical stimuli, and the observed stimuli and responses, and the reason for this relationship. So the person who are responsible that contribute to this study, psychophysics, is called Gustav Fechner. So there are some issue regarding or some topics that been studied by psychophysics. First one is threshold, second one is just noticeable differences, and then signal detection, sensory adaptation, and subliminal perception. So first one is threshold. Threshold or call limits is the point of intensity or sensitivity that people can detect the presence or presence of differences in the stimuli. So the stimuli that's above the threshold could be detected. The stimuli that below the threshold cannot be detected. For example, this is the threshold that differentiate between above and below. So if the stimuli exists or present is above the threshold, then we could detect. But if the stimuli that come is below the threshold, then it is not detected. We are not sensitive to this kind of stimuli that below the threshold. So stimuli with intensity below the threshold, that consider this as threshold, with intensity below the threshold, then we cannot detect. So undetectable. So the threshold, the stimuli that have higher level, that means above the threshold, can be detected. For example, two little lights far away from us, of course, if we cannot detect, that means it is because that stimuli is below the threshold. If we could detect, it's because it is above the threshold. So psychophysicists use two approaches to analyze human sensitivity to the stimuli, because sometimes we are not so sensitive to the existence or to the presence of stimuli. Some we could detect easily the existence or the presence of the stimuli. So psychophysicists come with the two approaches. First one is called absolute threshold. The other one called just noticeable difference. So absolute threshold is the minimum amount of detectable stimulations. So we could detect sometime because that stimuli have the minimum amount of detectable stimulations. So the smallest amount of, or some smallest unit or minimum amount of stimulation that person can detect, or 50% of the time that we could detect the existence of the stimuli. So absolute threshold is actually the minimum amounts of the stimulus, the existence, the intensity of the stimulus that we could detect. For example, the existence of the smell of the perfume. If we could detect the weakest smell that we could detect, that consider the minimum amount, because it is a little bit of above the threshold. If it is lower than threshold, then we cannot detect. So why it is 50%? Because it is considered reliable, because 50% of the population could detect the presence of the weakest amount of the stimuli. So below than this threshold, we could not detect the presence of the existence of this stimuli. So this is actually these are the example of the weakest amount of the stimuli that we could detect. That 50% of the time we could detect. For example, in terms of the candle, if it is far away, about 30 meters away, we could still detect the existence of the light. But if it is more than 30 miles away, then we cannot detect. Also, in terms of wash ticking, we could hear the wash ticking if it is within 20 feet, but if it is more than 20 feet, we cannot hear the ticking sound of the wash. And for the touch also, if for example the wings of the bee fall on our cheek, sometimes we could detect. For example, our eyebrow fall on our face. Sometimes we could detect. Sometimes we cannot detect. If we could detect, that's because if it is within the distance of 1 centimeter onto our cheek. If it is more than that, maybe we cannot detect. And the smell also, the taste, we put, for example, 1 teaspoon of the sugar, we try to dissolve in the 2 gallons of water. We still could detect a little bit of sweetness in the water. If more than that, we cannot detect. That's because of the smallest amount of stimuli that exists that we could detect. Just noticeable difference, the opposite of absolute threshold is the weakest amount of the stimulus that presents. Just noticeable difference is the smallest difference of change within one stimuli with the other that people could detect. So 50% detection rate is reliable because it differentiates between one could detect and one could not detect. So that's the threshold, that the cut-off point where people could detect. That's why they said 50% of reliability. So, the example of just noticeable difference, the change in one stimuli could be detected by others based if we want to compare the two stimuli. For example, here we could detect the changes. They are not the same, even though they look exactly the same, but because the stimuli itself have the smallest changes, these smallest changes or smallest difference, we still could detect. And this also is exactly the same, but because of different, a little bit of darker color. This is old color. This is lighter color. That's why we could detect. We could detect because according to this principle, just noticeable difference. We could detect things when it is the 50% change in one stimuli with the other that could be detected. And also this one is basically all the same except the color of the bell. We could detect because the contrasting colors. And according to the Weber said the increase in stimulus needed to produce just noticeable differences is constant. So what is meant basically, how much difference from one photo to the other photo that could us detect the difference. For example, if let's say this color also have the same color as this one, in order to make it difference, you need to have increase a little bit in colors. But according to the Weber, the increase in stimulus, how much increase in the stimulus that could make people aware of the difference. So there are some critique regarding the just noticeable difference and threshold because threshold focusing on the existence of threshold 50% of the time, but critic says it may be inaccurate because according to the critic said there are many factors may influence detection of the stimuli, such as then the critic come with the signal detection. Other factors such as strength of the stimuli, not the threshold. The threshold may be, for example, stated that in order for us to aware of the existence of the apple, it must be within certain distance. But that's based on the threshold because threshold said if it is within the threshold, above the threshold, we could detect the existence of the stimuli. If it is less than the threshold, then we cannot detect. But this critique regarding signal detection theory say is not if we want to base on just on threshold, it may be inaccurate because there are some products or some factor may influence the detection of the stimuli. For example, durian. Durian does not need to be within certain threshold. Even it is far away, even though you pack the durians, put in the box and pack, still you can smell you can know the smell of durian because of the stimuli, the strength of the stimuli of the durian. So here, signal detection theory come with the strength of stimuli, not just the threshold. If it is a threshold, maybe apply for the certain stimuli such as apple. If above the threshold, you can detect. Below the threshold, you cannot detect. But for durian, because of the strength of the stimuli, even though it's far away, you still could detect. Even though or in the similar distance, you still could detect the durian more than the apple, isn't it? And there's another theory regarding decision to select stimuli. Actually, sometimes our decision to select the stimuli is also based on our personal factor. So the textbook come up with the two type of processing, bottom up and bottom down processing. So basically, both top-down processing is our perception guided by our knowledge, our experience, our expectation, and our motivations. And bottom-up processing is a processing based on the informations that are specific or individual elements, and then move up to the whole. So basically, top-down processing is the processing of information from general to specific, bottom-up from specific to general. So bottom-up from specific to general, for example, in order to understand the textbook, we need to understand the alphabet first. We need to understand what is A, what is B, what is C, and so on. Then we could read the whole textbook. That's from bottom-up, that's means specific to general. Top down from general to specific, that means if we understand all the information, if we have all the information, if we have the experience, then we could use all this information to understand something specific. That's what it said basically. For example, if I give you this message for you to read, if you do not have if you do not have the top down information, if you do not know, you do not have experience, if you do not have knowledge about the alphabet, or no, maybe not never seen this before, you may struggle to understand the message. So if you know the message, if you maybe if you have experience reading newspaper, textbook, and so on, you could understand what's the message, what things, what the full writtens of this message. So, so basically, bottom up is from individual to whole. Top down is from whole to individual, from general to specific. Bottom up from specific to general. Okay, subliminal perceptions occur when stimuli are presented below the threshold. So before this, we are talking about threshold, just noticeable differences. Those two are things that we could detect when it is above the threshold. But subliminal perception is occurred when stimuli are presented below the threshold. So this one is below the threshold. So things or stimuli that come below the threshold, we still perceive, we still see, but we didn't aware about them, about the existence of these stimuli. So stimuli perception occurred whenever stimuli are presented below the threshold. We perceive, but we didn't aware. So perceiving without being aware. So some, for example, company, they use advertising to promote their products, and they know that if the products have some sexual or some sexual element, it could appeal more to certain gender. So they know in order to promote their products, so to be more attractive to certain type of gender about the products, so they may use some ethical way of advertising their product. So they may use subliminal perception where people see but didn't aware it. So when we talk about these things, subliminal perception is also been studied by parapsychology, such as in phenomenon regarding telepathy, precognitions, clairvoyance, and so on. So, for example, of subliminal perception is Baskin Robbins here. So we see this, but we didn't aware. Maybe we see Baskin Robbins, but we didn't aware that they have 31. So this 31 has something that's meant for them. I didn't know actually 31 what is meant, but I just want to show we see, but we didn't aware. For example, I use this example Lion King. So many children like to watch this Lion King, but some movie some producer when they want to promote or to show the movies to attract the childrens, they show sometimes photos like this. Uh, we maybe thinks that this is a normal photo, but actually they use the subliminal perception, because if you see closely, it's showing that see here the mouth of the lion. So this is actually have two interpreted message behind this. So it could attract maybe the father to watch this. Also the children may be innocent, they may cannot interpret this, but what I'm trying to say here, many of the advertising company may manipulate this subliminal perception to advertise their products, even though it seems like is this ethical, but because they have the double meaning behind it, it could be ethical, because the double meaning we see but we did not aware about it, so we consider it is okay, but actually it is not okay. For example, here there's advertisements by Coca-Cola. These also have double meaning. We see it, but we didn't aware about it. That's a subliminal perception. The message that appear, if it is subliminal perception, is below the threshold we see but we didn't aware. So as you can see, a lots of advertisements, what we see maybe comments, but actually what we see but we didn't aware, there are many uncommon in that kind of messages in the advertisements. Okay, sensory adaptation. Sensory adaptation is referring to our adaptation of our sensory, is an adjustment in sensory capacity after prolonged exposure to unchanging stimuli. So if we are exposed to the stimuli for a long time, our sensory become immune. So we cannot detect. For example, our room, the smell of our room, we cannot detect the smell of our room, whether it is bad, whether it is good, we cannot detect. But if someone come into our room, then they could know whether it is good smell or whether it is bad smell, because we are so immune with the smell or with the stimuli that we are so long exposed to it. So when we are prolonged exposure to the unchanging stimuli, our sensitivity to the stimulus gradually decline. So that's why when we wear our shoes, we didn't smell our shoes, but if we take off our shoes and then suddenly someone behind us, then we know whether our shoes smell so bad or smell okay. So gradual declines in the sensitivity to a stimulus is actually as a consequence of prolonged or constant stimulations. So basically what is meant here, if we are exposed to a stimuli, to an unchanging stimuli for a long time, we become immune to that smell or to that stimuli. So it's automatic that keep people aware of the change. So because we are exposed for a long time to the same stimuli, we become unaware of the changes of the sensory. So sometimes humans are interested in change in stimuli that makes it so basically what is meant sensory adaptation is our sensory tend to adapt to the stimuli that are unchanging, especially where we are exposed for a long time. For example, if you wear your perfumes, maybe because you with the perfume for a long time you didn't smell whether it is good or bad. Maybe when the time you spray on your skin you can smell, but after one day, in the class or in the office, you may not recognize, you may not aware of the smell anymore. But if you go out and mingle with others could smell your perfume. So and also your shoes, if because you are wearing your shoes for a long time and you didn't aware because your sensory already immune to your smell or to the stimuli around you, so you didn't smell it. But if the other people come pass through, they could smell because they just exposed to the stimuli. But you, because you are exposed to the stimuli for a long time, you become immune. Your sensory sensitivity decline because you are with the stimuli for a long time. So your sensory become adapt to the smell or to the stimuli. So sensory adaptation, there are many types of sensory adaptation. First one is selective adaptations. Selective adaptations. For example, when you are in the party, how we call it cocktail party syndrome. When you are in the party, you can hear lots of voices, maybe because of the music, because of the people talking to others. But still, if you talk to your friend, you still be able to listen to what your friend says because you block out all the informations, all the stimuli that are not important. So selective attention, you could pay your attention to selective stimuli. So that's what is meant by selective attention, where you could focus, where you could pay attention to the stimuli, to the selected stimuli that you want to listen or that you want to focus, and you block out all the unnecessary stimuli that are not important to you. So this actually the example when you are in the party like this, people keep talking and there's quite noise back in the background, but still you could listen to your friends talking and then could understand because you block all other stimuli around you. You just focusing, you just attend to the information or to the stimuli that you want to focus, and you block out all other stimuli. In the other sensory adaptation is inattentional blindness. So inattentional blindness is you just focusing on one sensory stimuli and then you just block or you just miss all other sensory stimuli. So inattentional blindness is quite dangerous because here is the example where you just focusing on just one stimuli, focusing on your mobile phone, where you ignore or you miss all other stimuli that come around you. So this what is meant by inattentional blindness, where you intentionally forget or ignore about other stimuli, but you just focusing on your main stimuli that you're interested to focus. So that's attentional blindness. The other one is attention fluctuates. Is attention divided between various stimuli at different tasks. So attentions fluctuated. I didn't have the example here. So basically, attentions fluctuates, attention divided between various stimuli, such as you have been given different tasks, you have so many tasks to do, so your attention fluctuate from one task to the other. So actually, attention fluctuation is the opposite of inattentional blindness. So this one is focusing just on one stimuli, this one focusing on more stimuli. So sensory adaptation occurs in all five senses. So sensory adaptation not just occur in one senses but occur in all five senses, hearing, visions, touching, and so on.